Imagine this. A loved one, a son or a daughter, has just suffered from a life-threatening accident. They are transported to a state trauma hospital, and despite being in the care of professional physicians, they tragically pass away due to preventable medical errors. As if this was not tragic enough, then finding out that legal statutes in the state of Florida devalue your loved one's life to zero. This is what we are fighting against. Come join Edward Salazar as he discusses the issues surrounding free kill laws and how to resolve them. Catch The Fight Against Free Kill Laws with Ed Salazar on Monday, 5 p.m. on all social media. Learn who we are and join our cause today.
You're listening to A Fight Against Free Kill Laws from AMP Media Production Studio.
Welcome to The Fight Against Free Kill Laws with Ed Salazar, where we give a voice to those who have suffered firsthand from medical malpractice. In Florida, families devastated by medical negligence are left without justice because of a law many don't even know exists. Florida's free kill law prevents families from holding doctors accountable. These are real stories with real loss and no justice. Contact Ed at 561-239-2417 or visit afreekill.com. Today we uncover the truth, share real stories, and demand change.
Good evening, friends, and thank you once again for taking the time to listen to our broadcast. A few thoughts before we bring on our guest. As far as Senate Bill 1700 goes, we still have not heard that it's on a calendar yet for any of the committees. The minute we get any notice at all that we've been scheduled for any of the Senate committee meetings, we will get the word out. Also, a friend of mine was talking to me recently, and they've been watching the podcasts. And they were a little confused. They said, well, your son had a daughter, right? And I said, yeah, he had a daughter and he had a stepdaughter. And the stepdaughter was the only father he ever knew. He says, well, if he had a young daughter, why was he a free kill? Well, now we're crossing into another area that segues into this whole mess. Sovereign immunity laws, sovereign immunity statutes. And this is a very involved thing involving tort law. And, I had to learn what tort law was myself. But we're going to drill down a little bit more on that next week. But for right now, this evening, we have a guest that's going to be with us, Karen Aguilar. And Karen, her father was her rock. Her father was so involved with her entire family, all the family. Was such a important part of the fabric of who that family was. Taken too soon, and she's got a very, very powerful story to tell. May we bring Karen in now, please? Karen.
Hi, Ed.
Hi, honey. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to share your story with us. We know it's difficult to talk about, and we appreciate your courage and your willingness to share with us. So, tell us, just a little bit about your father.
So my father was Steve Aguilar. He was 87. I've lived with him, since I was about 14, just by myself, and my parents split up. So we were very close. We, talked on the phone every day. He would always go to my kids' games. He was very involved as far as just kind of every day things with our family. But he was born and raised, in Tampa area near Ybor City. He had his own little plumbing business, and I would say probably out until he was in his 70s. But he was just very active and everything. He wasn't like he was on lots of medications or had a lot of different health issues. Really the only thing really that he had was, I would say, mid 80s. He was diagnosed with the AFib, but it was never like an irregular arrhythmia or anything. Never that the doctor or cardiologist was concerned about. Um,
So he
and
wasn't on any active treatment for AFib?
he was really only on just the Eliquis, the medication that they
Yeah.
use for that.
Yeah, right.
And with low blood pressure, he had low blood pressure for a long time, but same thing. He was just on a pill for that daily. So it was nothing crazy. Just a couple pills that he took a day. That's really all it boiled down to.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about what it was that, brought you to take him to the hospital.
So I would say like 4 to 5 days, prior to me taking him to the emergency room, he had fallen. Um, and so at that point, I had kind of heard just, like you kind of know, like, I guess you could say almost like I don't know, I call it like a mother's instinct, right? Even though it's my dad, I'm used to helping with him. You could tell, right, from like the way he's trying to get up, like a moan or something like that. So I knew he had some type of back pain or something going on. I just wasn't sure like what it was. So on it was New Year's Eve of 24. I said, hey, we're gonna just go ahead and just go to the emergency room. Let's just get you checked out, try to figure out what's going on. So he went, and he really, honestly, he did not like hospitals. He did not like, and wasn't on a lot of medication, so he really didn't want to go, but he went. So on the way, we even stopped and got a bite to eat together. He walked into the emergency room with his walker. He did have a walker just to help him walk better, because he sometimes would have a little bit of trouble walking. Um, but I mean, he walked in. From there, we got to triage. He kind of joked around with the triage nurse, and we got taken back to the ER. They did some different tests and whatnot, and from there, it really was just the doctor coming in telling us, hey, we did some scans, and he does have a fractured back, fractured thoracic is what they referred to it as.
So
And she said, this,
I think in the notes I saw, it said thoracic vertebrae.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
correct. So really from there, she just indicated, at this point, there's really nothing we can do for him here. You know, you could take him home, give him some, just some over the counter pain meds, and, um, just give him some different liquids, and you'd be all right. And then the big but came, which is kind of what started all this. And she said, but, my recommendation is he's a little bit dehydrated. I would suggest that we admit him for the night and just, maybe run some fluids through him and see how that goes. So, of course, me just being concerned, and I'm not, any way, shape, or form related to the medical field. So I just kind of wanted to do what was right. And I figured who would know best, right, than the doctor. So, I went with going ahead and agreeing to admit him that day. Probably around 5 p.m., I guess, is when he got admitted. And from there, we got him a room, and I went in, and I'm his power of attorney. I'm his healthcare surrogate. So I know like everything about my father. He didn't know how to read or write. So I was
Hmm.
very involved even from age with helping my dad when we would go to the doctors and things. So I, I knew where, all of his medical history. So I'm very transparent when I go in and tell them, hey, he has AFib. I have all his doctor's information. I wrote my name on the whiteboard, um, and just kind of let them know just about his, just his medical stuff, which wasn't very,
Right.
very
Right.
big.
Hmm. So he had
So
no
it seemed
real
like,
significant medical history.
no, no,
Right.
no. So
Okay.
really from
So.
there, he wound up eating a meal before I even left that night. I left around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, because I wanted to wait until I met the doctor. Um, he was eating. The nurse was kind of joking with him. She was trying to get him to relax because, like I said, he doesn't like going to the doctors and things like
Hmm.
that. Um, and she asked him what would make him feel comfortable. So he said, I want to listen to some music. So she asked him what his favorite music was. He said, country music. And she put on the Alexa device and played music. And he just kind of just
So,
laid there and just seemed relaxed.
so
Uh,
they started an IV on him, right?
they, mhm.
And then, so he was admitted for like borderline dehydration.
Correct. That was pretty much what his admission was for.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I left the hospital that first night around 10 p.m. Because I have young kids and things at home, but I live literally 10 minutes or less. So I just made it very clear to them, that if anything is to happen, just make sure to please call me right away. I can, come down here within minutes. I even let them know about like a stint that he had back in maybe the 2020 timeframe, where he, had fallen and they had him in the hospital admitted at that time at a different hospital in Tampa, but they had given him Ativan and it was just a really horrible medication. He wound up just having a really bad side effects and it just wasn't good. So I let them know I really didn't want them giving him anything crazy like that, that it just didn't react well with
So
him.
you specifically said no Ativan.
I did say no Ativan, or anything along those lines,
Okay.
so
Hmm.
told to the staff and to the doctor and everything before I left. Yeah.
Okay. So you came in to see him the next day, and
Yeah. So the next day, and I'm used to the normal 7 to 7, shifts and having to kind of get there when they do their rounds. Cause God, if you miss it, it's like you don't see the doctor for hours, God
right.
forbid. I woke up early that morning. I did get a call while I was getting ready at like 6:30 in the morning. And it was the doctor that I had talked to the night before I left. And, he was just telling me, hey, we actually did some other tests last night. And your dad got a little, I remember him saying agitated is what he said. Your dad got a little agitated in the middle of the night, so we had to give him some Seroquel. Of course, I didn't know what that was at the moment. And I think I was more focused than just obviously trying to get there. So he said, we ran some more scans and it looks like he has some fractured ribs, some old, some new. So of
Okay.
course
Well,
I'm just
let's back up just a second. they
sure.
they they gave him Seroquel, which I believe is
Hmm.
an antipsychotic,
It is.
and
It is. I would later find
yeah,
correct.
and so what was the explanation for using Seroquel, or there was none?
Well, the explanation for that was because he became agitated, is what quote unquote the doctor said overnight. So, um, yeah, again, I mean, I specifically as well just wrote on the whiteboard my name, right? That I'm the power of attorney and my phone number, myself, because I even told them I will drive down here. So if he starts, if for some reason he gets nervous or whatever, just call me. I'll come right down here. That's not a problem. So, I mean, I don't know, why they would just automatically, to me, they jump too quick to give medication to people. And honestly, after when I looked up the Seroquel and realized obviously all the things about it, I was shocked, right? That they
Yeah, I
would
think
even
there's
give
there's a caution that in with cardiac conditions, and
there
with
is
his AFib, and
and
it should be used very cautiously, and it should be withdrawn very slowly.
yeah, and it really says not even it's not recommended to give it to patients that are elderly or with, like you mentioned, AFib especially, or any type of cardio type issues because it can cause irregular arrhythmia,
Hmm.
which is what it did. That's where it all started is that medication, and then from there things spiraled the next, you know, 3 days. So yeah, so from that point, when I got to the hospital, I got there early that morning, came in, and when I walked in, my father wasn't able. He was kind of like a zombie, honestly. He wasn't able to speak. He wasn't able to swallow. Um, couldn't eat anything obviously because he couldn't swallow, drink. And he was almost like aspirating, is the way I would explain it,
Yeah.
because it would, he'd be laying there and I could tell he's almost got, like something stuck in his throat and you could hear it almost. And so I watched one of the nurses do it. So then while I was in there with him, I seen where she was suctioning his throat. So, I mean, obviously when I'm in there by myself, I started suctioning his throat because I could tell, like, this, and I'm
He's
thinking to
having
myself,
trouble swallowing.
right, right. And I'm
Hmm.
just thinking, how did we get here? And so, um, yeah, I mean, that's definitely all of the side effects from the Seroquel. If you look, I mean, it's a simple Google search, right? So my issue is if I can simply Google search these things that are obvious that he had and you were told he had these conditions, why give that to him, you know? Um, so I mean, at that point, really, it was a matter of, I'd say, I don't know, an hour or so after being there, and they were taking him back, I think, I don't know, to do some other scan, for his ribs or something. And I just remember them coming back into the room and then wheeling him back in the room, and he was breathing really heavily. And the nurse or whatnot mentioned, is this typical of him? And I'm like, no, not really. And so I don't know, within probably the next 15 to 20 minutes, all of a sudden he he basically had a cardiac event at that point, and his heart rate, from my understanding, just went through the roof. And I just remember people rushing in and them calling, whatever code at that point, and lights flashing. And they said, we're rushing him to ICU. And from there, he was moved up to ICU. Everything's happening, so fast. So you're just in shock, right? Because you're just brought him here and they were going to let him go home. I mean, how are we at this stage?
How did you get to the
Um,
point where he needs to be rushed to ICU? Yeah.
right, right. And had any issues with his heart? I mean, you know what I mean? Other than the AFib, but meaning it's never been a regular to where his doctors were concerned, other than his one pill a day. So I would think that's pretty darn good for 87,
Yeah.
and for those issues. So yeah, so I went up to ICU from there. I took a step to the car, went up to ICU. Um, and
No, I'm sorry. I think we've lost the audio for Karen. Okay, let's go back to commercial for just a minute and we'll figure out what's going on with our audio. Thank you.
Imagine this. A loved one, a son or a daughter, has just suffered from a life-threatening accident. They're transported to a state trauma hospital, and despite being in the care of professional physicians, they tragically pass away due to preventable medical errors. As if this was not tragic enough, then finding out that legal statutes in the state of Florida devalue your loved one's life to zero. This is what we are fighting against. Come join Edward Salazar as he discusses the issues surrounding free kill laws and how to resolve them. Catch The Fight Against Free Kill Laws with Ed Salazar on Monday, 5 p.m. on all social media. Learn who we are and join our cause today.
All right. Let's have Karen call back in, please, and see if we've got this thing rectified. There she is. Hi, Karen. Can you give us a call back in, please?
Am I just going through the same, like I have to, do I X out of that call and then do it again?
Yes.
I do it the same way? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Okay. Now, I did read over Karen's notes and the outline she sent us. So, at this point, she initially she takes her father to the hospital because he was having back pain from having fallen a few days earlier. X-ray showed that he had a fracture of a cervical vertebrae, but that he was also had some dehydration. So they recommend that he stay in overnight. They can start an IV and hydrate him that way. During the course of the night, they said that he had become agitated, and to help with the agitation, they gave him an antipsychotic medication called Seroquel. Seroquel, from our understanding, has a caution, especially with elderly people and people with any cardiac condition, that it be used very, very cautiously, and that it be withdrawn very, very gradually. And in the course of additional diagnostic studies, he suffers a cardiac event and is sent to ICU. I think we're back with Karen now. Karen.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Did you hear my recap? We're at the point where he had gone to, you had to take him back, or that he was sent to the ICU.
Okay. Yeah.
And
So from the ICU, really from there, it was just a matter of, like I said, of them just giving him some oxygen. They got him stable again. I talked to a respiratory therapist that actually came in. She did some blood gas check on him, and actually at one point towards the end of the day said it was so good that she was going to go ahead and take off the big mask, that they were using. And they were going to go ahead and just do just the little nose cannula just to give him light flow, just to keep him comfortable. Um, so at that point, it was just a matter of kind of just keeping him comfortable. But he was still very zoned out from the medication. I mean, that was something that I did look up to see how long it would last, because to me it felt very similar as far as just effects wise, like kind of like the Advent where it just zombied him out. And it said it could take 2 to 3 days, just depending on how he processes medication. So I knew from there it was definitely going to be at least the 2 to 3 days before he could fully be kind of back to waking up and normal. So yeah, so from ICU at that point he stayed the night. I come in the next morning, which at that point would be um, where I'd speak to a nurse. The nurse says, hey, I talked to your dad this morning, and he's Spanish. So she said I spoke to him a little bit in Spanish, and I think he understood me pretty good. And so I said, oh well, good. Hopefully he's coming off that medication. So I walked over to my father. I held his hand, and I said, hey, Dad, I'm here. And he just looked at me with his big blue eyes. And then from there, he just looked at me, and I said, hey, who am I? And he said my name. And I said, you know who I am? And he said, Karen, very lightly, because you got to remember his throat is super dry, right? He hasn't been able to swallow. He hasn't really had anything. Um, so from that moment, he kind of zonked back out a little bit. And I just said, oh, good, the medication must be wearing off. And so at that point, I would say I kind of just sat there and did crosswords while I sat next to him holding his hand. And I don't know, within maybe the next 30 minutes to an hour, the nurse comes over and says, hey, the doctor ordered a feeding tube placement. We're going to need you to leave the room. And so, of course, I don't really know to ask any real questions. I'm thinking, okay, this is maybe protocol at this point, right? So I leave the room and I go in the waiting room, and I'm in there and I'm just talking to some different friends and family on the phone. And within maybe, I don't know, the next 20 minutes, all of a sudden I just hear code blue being called, all the lights going off, obviously lots of commotion. And I'm thinking, just I could feel it in my soul, right? At that point, I'm like, this is my dad. It's got to be my dad. And so, no longer, it feels like forever, but no longer than, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so, a doctor, that I had never seen rushed in and had a chaplain with him, right? So he's like, your father just coded, and we've been doing chest compressions on him, but he's 87, and he has the fractured ribs and the fractured back, and he's had a good life, and you're just going to cause more injuries to him if we continue. But I need to know if you want us to try to continue. And I'm looking at him, like deer in the headlights, because I'm in shock, right? I mean, again, I
yeah,
was just,
of course.
I mean, he just said my name. He was just coming off the medication. Um, and he could have went home, right? On if you think about it, day one, the doctor felt confident enough that he could have just went home. At that point, I'm yelling and crying, and I'm like, no, you're going to go back in there. What did y'all do to my dad? You're going to go back in there, and so they did at that point. And I don't know how long passed before they let me back in. I forget. But at that point, when I go back into the room, he's on every machine you can think of, ventilator, you know, obviously there's lots going on with his body at that point. Um, so, the other doctor comes in, that had kind of been treating him or whatever. And I'm yelling, I want an incident report filed, like, I don't understand how we're here. And I remember, I'll never forget it, one of the nurses saying, what do you mean an incident report? Why would we write an incident report? And I'm looking at her going, because, he walked in here and I was just holding his hand and he was just saying my name. Like, how did we get here? So at that point, there was actually a chief medical officer for the hospital that came down into the room. Now, there was a lot of stuff still actively going on with them, hooking up different things, checking all kinds of vitals.
Hmm.
I don't really know too many chief medical officers that come down to a room unless they really know
That
someone
somebody
made a
messed
mistake.
up.
Yeah.
They were going to be putting in a feeding tube, and next thing you know, they're calling a code.
Yes. Yes. So ultimately, from that point, he, he just, the chief medical officer gave me his card, mentioned he's retiring in 2 days, which I always said, well, that's convenient because I'm obviously upset. Like, what is going on? And I asked for all of his chain of command information because I fully intended to pursue whatever avenues, in that regard, because I knew everything was just a spiral from the beginning. Um, so from there, it really just became a nightmare with, uh, more
Okay,
things
well,
going
he
on.
he he survived the initial resuscitation, uh,
He did.
and then in your notes you were talking about a recommendation for CRTT, the continuous renal replacement therapy. What brought that
Yes.
about?
So yeah, so basically I had, first off, I had asked that day, pretty much he was just, out of it. Obviously, he's all these different things. So they didn't really do much that any further that day. So it would be
But
the
he's
next
still on
morning
a
I came in.
ventilator at this point.
Correct.
Yeah.
He never came off of it that. Um, so the next day I had actually come in early in the morning and I asked for a transfer. I wanted to transfer him to a different hospital because obviously I'd lost faith in every personnel that I'd dealt with,
Yeah.
that entire hospital. Um, and I had actually, said I'd like him to go to Tampa General, which is a major trauma hospital here, because God knows what else, was wrong with him at that point. I was told he was too critical to be transferred, which I was in shock that as an advocate, you could not, you know, that meant nothing, right? So at that point, they kept him. And later that day, they said, hey, his kidneys are failing. And he never had kidney issues before.
So
So,
now he's in renal failure with no previous history of kidney disease.
correct. And they said, we're going to need to do this renal replacement therapy. It's called CRRT. We have to put a line down his neck, with him being obviously on blood thinners, because of his, blood pressure and whatnot. It's very dangerous. And I said, well, obviously we have to do what we have to do. So, from there, they were having me sign documents now. So I will say it was kind of odd because obviously along the way, any other things they were doing, like the feeding tube placement, they had never asked me to sign anything. But ever since that incident with the feeding tube, now everything's being shoved in my face to sign off. Um, so from there, they asked us to leave for like an hour or so they could get everything ready. They got the line. I remember before we left, they said the line went in fine. He did not bleed, like they thought could happen. And, said they should be getting everything set by the time we got back. So we came back, walked to the room, and I remember the two nurses, they were looking at me, and they closed the curtain and said, we're not ready yet. And I just, again, you just know when something's not right, and I could just feel it. So we go to the waiting room, and then probably within the next, 20 minutes or so, a new doctor walks in, right? Because now it's shift change. He walks in, and we've never seen him at all this entire time we've been there. And he said, you know, at this point, we're going to need to transfer your father to a different hospital.
So now they're ready to transfer.
Right. So I just looked at him, like, okay, when I asked to be transferred this morning, you told me you couldn't do it. And so now you can. So come to find out, apparently, um, one of the nurses spoke up that was supposed to be helping do the CRRT treatment, because it's pretty involved. I actually watched it at the second hospital, um, and said they didn't feel comfortable doing it, so
Well,
they
yeah,
had no one to do it.
yeah.
I mean, and I'm thinking, how right, if you obviously didn't have staff that was qualified enough to do this, and this is a major treatment, you have people coming in, why wouldn't you have, again, you should have transferred him before. So at that point, they asked for a list of hospitals. So we asked for Tampa General. We were told there was no beds. Um, I mean, I had to call myself to the charge nurse at the transfer at TGH just to ask. I was pretty much told, it's not up to the patient or their family. It's between the two doctors at both hospitals, and they discuss the case. And then the doctor at the receiving hospital makes the call whether they want to accept the case or not. So I honestly, I knew right then that there's no way they're going to accept my dad. I mean, not in this condition. They've basically got him on his deathbed, and they've made so many errors. Who in their right mind is going to want to accept that, right? They don't want to take that on, and I understand that, but obviously, in my case, I should not have been in that position.
Never
Nor
should
should
have
my
gotten to
father.
that in the first place.
Yeah, and so really from there, it was a matter. I asked to be transferred then to their main campus, meaning the same hospital branch, but the main campus, which is also another major trauma center in Tampa. And we
Right.
were told they had no beds. And then they said, well, we have this other one, which is again their sister hospital. It's in Tampa, and we can take him there because they can do the CRRT. And I said, but he has so many other things I'm sure wrong with him. Why would we be taking him to the same type of hospital that has the same specialties where we're at now? That makes no sense to me. You should be taking him somewhere where if anything goes wrong, they can address it further. But we didn't have the option. So from there, it was a matter of then getting him transferred, which was a joke. So all this time's ticking, right? They had already told us that day if he did not have the CRRT treatment by that day, he would die. Um, so, they called an ambulance. I said a helicopter needed to come get him because he was in, like I said, deathbed. I mean, at this point, they put him there. And they, they said the ambulance was coming. And then I remember them coming back in and then saying, well, actually, the ambulance had to cancel. They're overwhelmed. And then they called the Pasco County Fire Department and asked for assistance with an ambulance. The ambulance was supposed to be on the way, and then once again, here comes a nurse telling us actually they're not able to come. And I'm in like twilight zone because I mean, how can this be happening? This doesn't even seem real at this point. So I think finally I was so fresh. I think they knew at that point, as I even said, you need to call the chief medical officer and get him a helicopter. A helicopter arrived around 1 a.m. So they did medevac him finally at 1 a.m. So again, the next day. We got to the hospital, which was in Hillsborough County, and I think I stayed in the room. I stayed with my father the whole time, right there on the couch, and watched them do the CRT treatment. Talked to all the nurses, and really from there it was, just a matter of them doing the treatment. But I don't even think the treatment could start by the time they got everything hooked up. It was like 3 a.m.
Oh my
And I
God.
just remember, you know, his heart rate. When they do the CRT, it's very involved. I don't know if you know what
Yeah.
it is, but you got two nurses working it, and they're constantly looking at the vitals and all those
Yeah.
things. And so around 7
So
a.m.,
how long did he survive until?
I would say, I mean, he was until about around 7:30 a.m. that morning. There was
You
a
know, I
doctor that came in to
I,
talk.
I, I can just imagine. Well, your advocacy for him is so very, very admirable. And what he went through, what you put yourself through, all out of love of your father. But you're right. You went to the emergency room for back pain, and for it to evolve to this is just inconscionable.
Yeah.
I'm terribly, terribly sorry. We're gonna have to wrap this up. I I, I want to hear more.
I,
But so shortly after this, you found out about the free kill laws, right?
I did. Yeah. I was calling um, several attorneys, and from there, none of them would say Florida free kill law. Everyone just said the laws are very complex, and I wound up just on my own, trying to look up some different cases. I'm in the insurance business, and I deal with some type of, I have a little bit of knowledge of litigation and things. And so I found an attorney that actually had, an incident that with a patient at that hospital, the second hospital. And I looked it up. So I called that attorney from that case. And, basically he said, this is going to be very quick, very short. He said, you said your dad was 87. I'm assuming he's not married. And I said, no. And he said, I'm assuming you're not under 25. And I said, no. And he said, I hate to tell you this, I get 6 to 7 cases a week. There's not going to be anything.
6 to 7 cases a week.
Yep. I will never forget it because, yeah.
Well, that just speaks to the scope and the magnitude of this problem.
Yeah.
And this
Absolutely.
problem is not going to be swept under the carpet. With warriors like you, Karen, and everyone else, this movement is growing exponentially. And this year we will win.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I'm hoping.
Karen, I want to thank you so very, very much for taking the time to be with us.
Absolutely. Thank
Our
you for what you
hearts
do.
are with you. And I look forward to staying in touch with you. Okay?
Yes, you. Thank you, Ed. I appreciate your time.
All right, you're so very welcome. Okay, thank you, folks. Your support is much appreciated, and we will continue to bring these stories. Every time I hear somebody, I become more and more determined. Anything the viewers can do to help us is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for watching The Fight Against Free Kill Laws with Ed Salazar, where we interview those who have dealt firsthand with medical malpractice. Families are devastated by medical malpractice and left with no justice. This isn't just a loophole. It's a failure to protect the ones we love. It's time to change the law. It's time for accountability. Contact your state legislatures, visit afreekill.com for more information on how to help, or contact Ed at 561-239-2417. Because every life should matter.
You're listening to A Fight Against Free Kill Laws from AMP Media Production Studio.